Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to really get into the complex stuff, try and cut through the noise, and bring you the insights you need to be, well, genuinely informed. Today, we are tackling something absolutely critical. It's about how power itself is changing in the 21st century and what that means for democracy everywhere globally, but also right here at home. The big question we're wrestling with really is how are those traditional ideas of power being, reshaped? And what does it all mean for our societies, for our freedoms?
It's definitely a huge topic and so relevant right now. For this dive, we've pulled together quite a range of sources. We've got reports from Freedom House, some really sharp analysis from Nickel and Dimed, detailed background from Wikipedia, academic work from a political science journal, data via number analytics, mpow.org, and some fascinating research out of UC Berkeley. Our goal, really, is to pull out the key threads from all this material. We want to help you understand the modern authoritarian playbook, the shifting sands of global influence, how media fits in, which is complicated, and, the real challenges facing democracies and, well, all of us today. This isn't just theory. It's about helping you figure out how to navigate this pretty tricky landscape.
Okay, yeah, let's try and unpack that. We've all seen this resurgence, I guess, of authoritarian rule, but the sources are clear. This isn't just like Soviet Union 2.0. So what makes this modern authoritarianism different? And honestly, why is it proving so effective right now?
Yeah, that's the core question. A key point from the research is that it succeeds because of refined and nuanced strategies of repression. That's the phrase they use. It's also about exploiting the vulnerabilities in open societies and, worryingly, the spread of illiberal ideas within democracies themselves. The big difference from old-school communism is it's not driven by one single all-powerful ideology trying to control every little thing in your life. Instead, it offers what one source calls an illusion of pluralism.
An illusion of pluralism.
That sounds subtle. It is. So you might have different media outlets, right? But the state makes sure it controls the really important ones. You might have private businesses, but often there's a lot of corruption, cronyism baked in. People might even travel. The catch is, none of this can seriously challenge the political power structure. The main strategy is capturing the key institutions: the executive, courts, media, civil society groups, the economy, security forces, everything that supports genuine pluralism. Think of it like undermining the foundations of a building, slowly. The aim is, and this is a direct quote, to cripple the opposition without annihilating it.
Wow. Cripple without annihilating.
Exactly. And to flout the rule of law while maintaining a plausible veneer of order, legitimacy, and prosperity. It looks okay on the surface, maybe.
That's chilling. It's like hollowing something out from the inside. So if that's the playbook, are there specific countries our sources point to as the pioneers, the ones who wrote this playbook?
Absolutely. The sources are pretty clear on this. Russia and China are highlighted as the two major modern authoritarian powers, really leading the way. Under Putin, Russia's had an outsized role in developing these systems, particularly media control, propaganda, ways to stifle civil society, weaken political opposition. Take the media, for instance. Russia basically transformed its media landscape into one just dominated by blatant propaganda.
Right. We hear about that, but what does it actually look like?
Well, the sources mentioned just outrageous examples reported in Russian media. Things like the U.S. supposedly hiring ISIS to down a plane or planning a war in Europe just to cancel debt. There was even a story about the crucifixion of a young boy in Ukraine. It reaches a point where, as one analysis puts it, the borders between fact and fiction have become utterly blurred. It creates an irrelevance of truth. It's not even about believing the specific lie anymore. It's about sowing so much confusion that people just check out.
Making truth irrelevant. That's powerful.
And it goes beyond just news. Russia's also been a leader in the rewriting of history for political purposes, reassessing Stalin as maybe a strong, if mildly flawed leader. Meanwhile, someone like Andrei Sakharov, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a global figure, is almost completely erased from the discussion. Then there's foreign policy. Russia uses hybrid warfare. It's this mix of conventional military stuff, espionage, cyber attacks, constant propaganda. It blurs the line between war and peace.
Like the frozen conflicts.
Exactly, like in Georgia or Ukraine. Keeping those conflicts simmering gives Russia ongoing political leverage. They justify it partly through this idea of a Russian world that needs protecting or reclaiming.
Okay, so that's Russia's approach. What about China? The sources mentioned 21st century censorship.
Right. China's focus, especially under Xi Jinping, has been heavily on controlling the internet. You've got the Great Firewall, of course, but they're also really pushing this concept of internet sovereignty. Essentially, each nation gets to control its own slice of the internet, which fundamentally goes against the idea of a globally open web.
So digital borders, basically.
Pretty much. And their suppression tactics are, well, quite stark. Things like televised confessions from bloggers or activists. Peter Dolan was one example mentioned. Widespread censorship of things like the Panama Papers. And in universities, there's the 7 don't mentions topics you just can't discuss, like universal values, press freedom, civil society, past party mistakes. What's really striking with China, though, is the global economic muscle they use. Influencing global culture, buying Hollywood studios, Daly and Wanda Group was cited, or photo archives like Corvus. The goal is to ensure China is portrayed favorably, always.
Okay, so we've got this modern authoritarian playbook, these sophisticated, often subtle tactics for control. But you mentioned this is happening partly because the idea of power itself is changing globally. It's not just armies and territory anymore.
Exactly. That's the bigger context. Power dynamics have really shifted. Historically, power often meant raw force. Think ancient Greece, the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, or European empires expanding. Then it shifted more towards the ideological struggles of the Cold War. Winning hearts and minds became central. Now, scholars like Kenneth Waltz, a major name in international relations, argue that things like economic growth, education, and technology are becoming much more important, while traditional things like resources, population, and territory are diminishing in relative importance. It's less about grabbing land, more about tech dominance, economic influence, the battle of ideas.
And ideology is still key in that battle.
Oh, absolutely. Ideology has grown to be of utmost importance. It was the main weapon for the U.S. and Soviets, right? And the insight here is crucial. Without the endorsement of the populace, its prospects are destined for failure. Ultimately, power needs legitimacy. It needs people to buy in, which leads us straight to the media.
Right. This shift towards influence, towards belief, makes the media absolutely central. Our sources talk about its role in political polarization. How does it actually work? How does it shape what you, the listener, believe?
Well, the media plays this dual role. It's described as both a mirror and a shaper. As a mirror, it reflects and often amplifies existing divisions. Think about agenda setting, deciding what's news and partisan narratives. This feeds into selective exposure. We all tend to seek out news that confirms what we already think.
Guilty as charged.
We all do it. And that leads to echo chambers, where you're mostly hearing your own views bounce back at you. Plus, the algorithms on social media, the algorithmic bias in news feeds tend to reinforce this, showing you more of what you already like. But the media is also a shaper. The way information is presented, the framing, can subtly change how you perceive an issue. And this is where it gets tricky, discerning genuine grassroots opinion from what the sources call astroturfing.
Astroturfing, like fake grass.
Exactly. It looks like a real grassroots movement, but it's actually manufactured, funded by outside organizations with an agenda. Examples cited include things like ExxonMobil pushing climate change misinformation in the past, or some of the debates around how movements like the Tea Party got started and funded. It makes it hard to know what's real popular sentiment.
That is a challenge, but there is still genuine bottom-up people power, right? Grassroots movements where ordinary people come together.
Oh, absolutely. And that's fundamentally different. A grassroots movement, by definition, uses people within a community as the base for change. It's about collective action from volunteers at the local level. The tactics are all about direct engagement, holding meetings, talking to neighbors door to door, petitions, letter writing, raising money from lots of small donors, mass demonstrations. And now, of course, online tools are huge social networks. Hashtags like #MeToo, #BlackLivesMatter, #LoveWins, #Resist. They allow for organizing and spreading messages on a massive scale.
Any historical examples that stand out?
Sure. The sources mention classics like the American Civil Rights Movement, people like William Van Til working on local school integration efforts, or more internationally, Brazil's landless workers movement, MST. Even the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign, which relied heavily on small, individual donations and volunteer energy, is cited as a modern example focused on mass participation. That's real people power.
Okay, so we have these sophisticated authoritarian methods, shifts in global power, the complex role of media, and genuine grassroots pushback. But the sources also bring up this term, illiberal democracies. It sounds like a contradiction. What is that?
It really does sound like a contradiction, and it's a worrying trend. Illiberal democracies are basically societies where they still hold elections, and sometimes those elections are reasonably fair on the surface. But crucially, the state systematically undermines political pluralism. They deliberately create a skewed electoral playing field. It's democracy, but without the liberal protections like strong rule of law, minority rights, or a truly free press.
So democracy in name, but not really in spirit or practice.
That's a good way to put it. The sources point to Hungary and Poland as key case studies. In Hungary, Viktor Orban actually gave a speech championing illiberal democracy. He suggested successful countries might be not Western, not liberal, perhaps not even democracies, and he pointed to places like Singapore, China, India, Russia, and Turkey as models, as stars.
He actually said that.
He did. And then he followed through, rewriting the Constitution, weakening independent institutions, creating a crony capitalist state where allies get rich, and labeling civil society critics as basically foreign agents, paid political activists. In Poland, the Law and Justice Party, PCS, has done similar things, backing the top court, taking control of public TV and radio, demonizing scholars, getting into fights over history like the whole Polish death camps issue. They even passed this really broad counterterrorism law, giving huge surveillance powers, even though Poland doesn't really have a major terrorism problem. It's this slow dismantling of checks and balances, often using legal means.
And you mentioned Orban and Putin. The sources draw parallels.
Yes, striking parallels. A disdain for Western liberal values, tightened control over media, hollowing out institutions that provide oversight, a real dislike for human rights NGOs, and working to ensure the judiciary is compliant. It looks like a shared strategy, or at least significant borrowing.
Which leads to an uncomfortable place. Who is helping these leaders? Who are the flaxen friends, as the sources put it? The lobbyists and maybe even political figures in democracies who seem to enable or admire them.
Yeah, this is a really concerning part. There's a growing phenomenon, the sources say, of political consultants and PR firms, often based in Western capitals like Washington or London, working for autocratic regimes. China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Ethiopia, they all hire these firms. We see names like Paul Manafort, who worked for Marcos in the Philippines, Mobutu in Zaire, Yanukovych in Ukraine, basically helping dictators look better. Firms compete for contracts that boost China's image even as repression there increases. Richard Burt, a former U.S. ambassador, was promoting a Russian energy project while also advising the Trump campaign, which called for better ties with Russia. Michael Flynn did paid work linked to the Turkish government.
So it's partly about money and access?
A lot of it seems to be. But it's also about lending a kind of legitimacy, using the skills honed in democratic politics to serve anti-democratic ends. And then there's the outright admiration. Prominent figures in democracies, Nigel Farage in the UK, Marine Le Pen in France, Rudolph Giuliani in the US, Franklin Graham, have praised Putin for his supposed cool head, decisive leadership, or building a strong nation. Russia, meanwhile, cleverly builds these alliances across the political spectrum, not based on shared ideology, but aimed at disrupting European unity and weakening political establishments from within. It's quite strategic.
Okay, this brings it all back home. What does all this mean for us, especially for younger people, millennials and Gen Z, who are coming into their own politically? The sources mention a paradox. They have power, but also fatalism.
Yeah, it's a really striking finding. Millennials and Gen Z are undeniably emerging as the demographic center of power in U.S. politics. They have growing power in elections. Soon they'll be half the electorate. But despite that potential clout, there's this widespread feeling of being fatalistic about solving the big problems: economic inequality, climate change, the future of democracy.
Why fatalistic?
The sense seems to be disillusionment, a feeling that the political system is unresponsive to their needs, that older generations have basically failed to tackle these huge issues effectively. What's fascinating, though, is that the research finds young conservatives and liberals are actually more egalitarian and fatalistic compared to older folks in their respective parties. Their values are becoming more homogenous on things like climate action, women's rights, and wanting the government to do more about education and healthcare costs.
So there's more common ground among younger people across the political divide, but they feel powerless to change things.
That seems to be the paradox. They agree more on the problems and even some solutions, but they doubt the system can deliver. And the big risk, the sources warn, is that this fatalism leads to low turnout. They might just decide to opt out of political engagement altogether.
Even though they have the numbers to swing elections.
Exactly, even though they hold the potential power. And the sources give a pretty stark warning here. If illiberal forces have sufficient political will and the defenders of democratic institutions lack conviction and public support, anything is possible. End quote. When you see the rise of anti-establishment, populist, and nationalist politicians in democracies, it often means less focus on global cooperation, less focus on promoting democracy abroad, which ironically strengthens authoritarian hands by weakening democratic unity. It's a really critical juncture.
This deep dive has definitely shown, wow, the challenge to democracy is coming from so many angles. It's not just those external authoritarian states with their clever playbooks. It's also this internal erosion, isn't it? The weaponizing of information, the rewriting of history, the slow decay of institutions, and now this sense of fatalism among the very people who could be the most powerful force for change. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, complex and unsettling.
It really is. And knowledge is key, but
Yeah.
understanding how to apply it matters too. What's so striking is seeing how tactics developed by authoritarian regimes, you know, undermining truth in media, squeezing civil society, playing on divisions, how those tactics are now echoing, sometimes loudly, within democratic societies, even being admired, as we discussed. It shows how connected these trends really are globally.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? Here's something to think about. In a world where, as our sources said, the borders between fact and fiction have become utterly blurred, where your critical thinking is under constant assault, how do you actually identify and support the genuine grassroots efforts? The ones fighting for transparency, for pluralism, for an informed public debate? Especially when those efforts might be the most important defense we have against these illiberal forces, both the ones far away and the ones closer to home.